This is Newstalk ZB News.
Good morning, it's 6:30. I'm Niva Reti Manu. An international relations expert says China's visit will be a chance to pitch its case to New Zealand. Chinese Premier Li Qiang will arrive in Wellington this week to meet with the Prime Minister. International relations expert Geoffrey Miller told Mike Hosking New Zealand's position on AUKUS will likely be one of the main directives of the visit. And he says China will try its hardest to convince the Prime Minister not to join the pact.
They're very keen to point out all the good reasons why New Zealand should not join, and trying to point out just how important this relationship with China is. Remember, it is New Zealand's biggest trading partner.
Shortly, meantime, it's 5:13. Our relationship with China is going to get another close inspection this week with the arrival of the Chinese Premier. First official visit since 2017. Geoffrey Miller, international relations expert, back with us. Geoffrey, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
It's also sweeping through Australia, so this is a region in the spotlight as far as the Chinese are concerned.
Indeed, and it's massive. As you said, the first visit by a Chinese Premier to New Zealand since 2017. That's a very long time, and it follows Wang Yi's visit back in March, the Chinese Foreign Minister. So certainly Australia is now being courted again by China after all their troubles. But New Zealand is getting in first. He's coming to New Zealand first, Li Qiang.
And he's bringing, at least the Australian League of the Journey, there was a large business delegation. Is it about business or is it about the geopolitics and things like AUKUS?
Well, outwardly it's about business. And in the Chinese political system, the Premier is largely responsible for handling the economy. But I think behind the scenes there's going to be a lot of talk about AUKUS. That certainly wasn't mentioned in Christopher Luxon's statement yesterday, but it's very clear that China is not happy with the idea of New Zealand joining AUKUS, and it's got a chance to put its case to New Zealand because no final decisions have been made here. So I think that behind closed doors there'll be a lot of talk about AUKUS.
And can they justifiably, New Zealand that is, say that we don't know what it is, Pillar 2, and therefore we don't know what we're going to do, and that's a decent enough answer for the Chinese or not?
Yes, I mean, that's been the line that New Zealand's been using, for the past year or more. And I guess it still carries some weight because New Zealand still hasn't been officially invited to join. At the same time, I think China's smart enough to know that there are discussions ongoing between New Zealand and the other AUKUS members at some level, and they're very keen to point out all the good reasons why New Zealand should not join, and trying to point out just how important this relationship with China is. Remember, it is New Zealand's biggest trading partner by far. There's a lot on the line, and they might offer New Zealand some further carrots. There's talk of upgrading the free trade agreement a little bit further to include services to a greater degree than is currently the case. Visa access could also be on the table. China offers visa-free access to around a dozen countries, does not include New Zealand yet, but perhaps New Zealand could be brought into the fold there. It would be the first Five Eyes country if that happens.
All those issues that the Americans and the Europeans worry about, EVs and government intervention in the marketplace and tariffs and stuff like that, do we ignore all of that?
I don't think we ignore all of that. I think if you look at last week, Todd McClay was off signing agreements for the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which is very much the US economic vehicle to counter China. So I think it factors into the discussions, and I don't think China's probably that happy that New Zealand's signed up to the IPEF, as it's called. I think all of these issues will be on the table when Li Qiang, the Chinese Premier, is here this week.
Okay, the CPTPP the Chinese want in, allegedly we're able to, in some way, shape or form, if we wanted to help. Is any of that true, and can China get into a deal like that?
Well, yes, New Zealand formally is, I guess, the depository for the CPTPP because we started the whole arrangement way back when. And I think New Zealand's position formally is, if China meets all the tests, there's no reason why it couldn't be brought into the CPTPP.
Isn't that the key, though, Geoffrey, if it meets all the tests?
Oh, look, it's a long shot, isn't it? Yeah. Because of the other CPTPP members here. And, trade has become increasingly politicised. And, it seems unlikely that China would ever be allowed into this group.
Okay, Geoffrey, good to catch up with you as always. Appreciate your expertise. Geoffrey Miller, international relations expert.
24 away from 7.
Heather Duplessis-Allen.
Chief Prosecutor for the International Criminal Court, the ICC, has applied for arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and top Hamas leaders. ICC Prosecutor Karim Khan said on Monday that the warrants put forward are for crimes committed during the October 7th attacks and then the subsequent war on Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is pretty upset. He's called the decision a disgrace. Geoffrey Miller is an international relations expert. Hi, Geoffrey.
Good evening, Heather.
I spoke to Winston about an hour and a half ago, and he says we're getting ahead of ourselves calling it an outrage or getting upset in any way. Are we?
Well, I think he's probably playing for time here because, officially this is simply the seeking of the arrest warrants, and there's a panel of independent judges, of 3 independent judges who have to make the final call on whether they will be issued. It's probably not a bad thing to have a bit of time up your sleeve, and pointing to the judicial process is one way of doing that. But I think it's very likely that these arrest warrants will be issued.
What makes you so certain of that?
Well, it's mainly a procedural matter when it goes to these judges. The bar isn't that high for simply granting the arrest warrant. So I think they're probably likely to do that. And yes, it will be quite a moment when that moment actually happens.
So what does this in practice mean for Netanyahu? Does this mean that he cannot leave Israel because if he turns up in anybody else's country, we have to arrest him?
Well, there are 124 signatories to the International Criminal Court, so it is going to greatly limit his travel options. He'll be able to travel to the United States because it's not a signatory, but most European countries, the likes of New Zealand, we're all signatories to the International Criminal Court, so it is going to make travel really difficult. But I think beyond that, there's going to be a sense of stigma here. Benjamin Netanyahu will be the first democratic leader to be indicted by the International Criminal Court if that happens. And that's, he's going to be seen in the same light as Vladimir Putin. Of course, an arrest warrant was issued for him last year. So it will be some stigma. I think internally, though, in Israel, funnily enough, this will actually probably help Benjamin Netanyahu in the short term because it is going to galvanise support for him. The others in his coalition, like Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid, they've come out very much in support of him. And so is Joe Biden in the United States. Joe Biden said it's outrageous that this has occurred. So it might actually backfire in the short term and help Netanyahu, ironically.
Yeah, but on the Biden thing, why do you reckon he's reacted quite the way he has?
Well, I think for all the differences that Biden clearly has with Netanyahu, and we've seen some of these break out into the open over the past couple of months, I think this is probably a bridge too far for him. He's in an election year. And, it's just seen as beyond the pale, I think, in the United States by many on, the Democratic side and the Republican side to draw a parallel between Hamas and Israel. And that's what Karim Khan, the chief prosecutor, is effectively doing by indicting 2 Israeli leaders and 3 Hamas leaders on the same day for much the same thing. He's drawing a real equivalence there, a real parallel, and that's not going to go down well.
Jeffrey, do you think it's reasonable that the ICC has done this? I mean, the contrast between Netanyahu and, for example, Vladimir Putin is quite stark. Like, Vladimir Putin has invaded a sovereign country. Benjamin Netanyahu has gone after terrorists who attacked civilians in his country. Now, we may argue of whether he's gone too far, but he's only defending his own country. So is this fair?
Well, that will very much be the defence line used by Netanyahu and his supporters. And yes, I mean, there will be different opinions on this, whether this is justified, whether it's the ICC overstepping the mark. It really depends on which side you're on and how you see things with all of this. It is a huge step. It's a huge threshold for the ICC to cross. There's going to be all kinds of ramifications to come out of this. It is a question of wait and see at the moment, and we'll await the issuance of those arrest warrants if that happens, and then no doubt Winston Peters will actually have to comment perhaps with more substance.
If they grant the warrant, does this put us in a tricky position?
In practical terms, not really, because I guess neither the Hamas leaders nor the Israeli leaders are likely to visit New Zealand anyway. No doubt New Zealand would conduct those arrests if it had to. But, I think New Zealand would, as a strong supporter of these international institutions like the ICC, New Zealand would back it. That's very much New Zealand's position. New Zealand supports these multilateral institutions. So if the ICC has issued those arrest warrants, New Zealand certainly would support the enforcement of them.
Jeffrey, thank you very much for your expertise. Appreciate it. Have a lovely evening. That's Jeffrey Miller, international relations expert.
Heather Duplessis Allen. This is Newstalk ZB News.
Good morning. It's 7:30. I'm Neva Reddy Manu. Subsequent repatriation flights for New Zealanders from New Caledonia are still being worked through by MFAT and the Defence Force. A further 49 New Zealanders arrived in Auckland in the early hours of this morning aboard a Defence Force plane. They had initially been flown to Brisbane by a French flight. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron is due in New Caledonia today. International relations expert Geoffrey Miller told Mike Hosking it's a fast arrival for Macron and a show of force.
He's talking about dialogue, and I think there will be an element of that, but I think he's also showing a signal here that he's just not going to cave into these protests.
Range Rover Sport. This is Newstalk ZB News.
Good morning. It's 8 o'clock. I'm Neva Reddy Manu. Another 49 New Zealanders have been rescued from New Caledonia, with logistical arrangements being made to bring more home. They arrived in Auckland early this morning aboard a Defence Force plane. It brings to around 100, with close to another 200 thought to be still there. French President Emmanuel Macron lands in New Caledonia shortly. International relations expert Geoffrey Miller told Mike Hosking his trip is a show of defiance.
The local leaders refused to join him on a video call last week, so he's having to fly around the world to try and sort this stuff out.
Emmanuel Macron's arrived in New Caledonia, or if he hasn't, he's about to try and sort this mess out. We're slowly getting our people back home as well. As I mentioned, second plane 49 landing in Brisbane last night. Now, Geoffrey Miller, international relations expert, back with us on this. Geoffrey, morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
I'm no expert in this particular part of the world, but I'm looking at Macron. Has he been a bit slow on this, or is this distance thing whereby you're sitting in Paris and you don't really care what's happening out in the Antipodes? Has he let this one slide a bit or not?
Well, I think he's actually been quite fast to actually come out within a week while, they're still mopping up all the roadblocks and looted shops. I think this is a show of force. He's coming out not just on his own, but with three ministers, including his defence minister and his interior minister. So I think it's a sign of defiance to some extent, to show that he's not going to be cowed by these protests. He's talking about dialogue, and I think there will be an element of that. But I think it's, he's also showing a signal here that he's just not going to cave into these protest demands.
Does he have a defence? They had 3 votes. They lost 3 times. I mean, what else do you want to do? It's democracy.
Yes, well, I think that will be his argument to some extent. I think he's willing to listen and see if some kind of compromise deal can be reached, but otherwise I think he's going to put that voting reform plan to the French Congress, so it's a joint sitting of Parliament. I think by coming out, he's being defiant to some extent. Remember, the local leaders refused to join him on a video call last week, so he's having to fly around the world to try and sort this stuff out.
Yeah, and does he still have the problem? So he says, look, it is what it is. Democracy is democracy. The vote's going ahead. Does he have to resource the island to a greater level security-wise when he leaves the country because there's more where this came from?
Well, that's his conundrum, really, because he sent over 1,000 police and military to New Caledonia to restore order. And it's a big embarrassment, right? I mean, it looks like a debacle because it is really, and this is meant to be the jewel in the crown of France and the Pacific. And a great tourism destination, and New Caledonia's reputation is really ruined for the foreseeable future in tourism. So he's got a lot on his agenda, and he should be there now.
Tell you what, by the time you go through PNG, the Solomons, China, and by relation America, and now you got New Caledonia, the Pacific's looking a bit messy, isn't it?
Yeah, well, certainly plenty of challenges, and of course New Caledonia just came out of nowhere really.
Yeah.
A couple of weeks ago, no one was looking really at New Caledonia on the map. But I think, to be fair, Winston Peters has been, and that's why he scheduled his trip last week. He didn't get there because the riots happened just a couple of days before he was meant to land there. But Winston Peters would have been the first visit there since he visited New Caledonia the last time he was Foreign Minister back in 2018. So I think Winston Peters does understand that you need to visit some of these Pacific islands that don't get as much attention on New Zealand's radar, at least.
Give me 30 seconds on Rishi. Is he toast?
It's a big surprise, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's
4th
summer.
of July, no one was expecting this.
For me, it's summer.
Yeah, and during the Euro 2024 football championship, during school holidays in Scotland, it's a big surprise, and I guess that's his big card that he's playing here, a surprise on the back of some economic good news with the lower inflation figures. Surprise is always the thing you have up your sleeve, I guess.
Okay, good to talk to you. Appreciate it, Geoffrey. Geoffrey Miller, international relations expert with us this morning.